Let's see here. Why do I get tired after I eat? That's pretty simple. When you eat, your blood rushes to your bowels and out of your brain. So when your blood is concentrating here in your bowels, your body's naturally more tired. This is why so many different cultures take a nap after lunch or take a nap, after a meal. I mean, most animals in the wild take a nap after they're done eating. It's why? It's because they're digesting. All their blood and all their internal resources are being used to help them digest that food. So it's very natural to become tired. Bowel mucus. What is bowel mucus composed of? A number of different things, but a lot of different proteins and carbohydrate moieties that produce a viscous surface that can both protect but also lubricate. Is it concerning if I need a lot of magnesium to stay regular if under lots of stress? Yeah, I mean, it's concerning. It is concerning if you depend on magnesium and that's the only thing that you can depend on to have a regular bowel movement. That's always a concern. Does posture affect constipation? Yes, it can. This goes back to the sedentary lifestyle. If you're sitting down in a chair all day, remember the nerves that come out of your sacrum actually help feed your bowel. And if you immobilize those nerves and sit on them and compress them, that's poor posture, even though it's not the kind of poor posture most people think about, but it's still poor posture. Let's see. What causes diverticulitis? My experience, diverticulitis is typically flared as a result of food irritation. Once a person has a weakening or an outpouching of their intestinal wall, then eating a high residue diet where there's a lot of seeds, a lot of nuts, can re-aggravate it, not necessarily cause it, but re-aggravate it. Can disautonomia cause dysmotility, gastropariesis, and bladder incontinence? Yes. So dysautonomia, parasympathetic reflex, sympathetic dystrophy, those are all conditions that can cause poor motility. Gastroparesis, I'm glad you brought that one up. That's a very common side effect of gluten. I've seen a number of cases in my practice where people have gastroparesis as a result of gluten exposure, and their doctors never even thought to look at gluten as a potential culprit. So why would someone bleed from time to time while going to the bathroom? If it's red blood, then you probably most likely have a hemorrhoid, which is an engorged blood vessel near the rectum that is, being damaged as you're having a bowel movement, and that blood is coming out whole in red fashion, right? That's the most common. I mean, there's some cancers that can cause you to have bleeding, and there are some inflammatory bowel diseases that can cause you to have bleeding blood come out and show up in your stool. So all those are things that you should probably want to rule out, but most likely, for most people anyway, it's hemorrhoids are the most common reason why you'll see bright red blood in the stool. If you have celiac disease and are still having diarrhea, how do you resolve this? You get with a really good functional doc and figure out what else is going on. Because if you've got celiac disease and you're eating truly gluten-free, a true gluten-free diet, not the traditional standard gluten-free diet, but a true gluten-free diet, and you're still struggling with diarrhea issues, then there's something else going on that you're missing, something beyond just gluten. The best nutritional supplement to help stimulate bile is food, and that would be eating bitters. Just eating bitter greens can really help stimulate the bile quite effectively, Karen. So that would be what I would suggest. Can potassium and glutamine help with gut motility? If you are deficient in potassium and glutamine, they can help with gut motility, but they're not generally going to help if you're not low in them. Is it safe to use senna regularly? No, it's not. I wouldn't recommend using senna or any of the bowel irritants. A lot of the natural constipation, or not constipation, but anti-constipation teas, right? Like, there's a number of different brands that contain senna and casca sagrada and some of the other herbals. Those are bowel irritants. That's the way they work, is they irritate the lining of the GI tract. In long term, they're not something you want to have to depend on. We would consider those laxatives, just like we were talking about laxatives earlier. Chronic use of laxatives can actually trigger or set the stage for long-term constipation. Is there a way to test for FODMAP sensitivity rather than guessing? So many vegetables hurt my stomach. It's difficult to detect what's causing the issues. No, unfortunately, there's not. There's not like a great test that measures FODMAP. What you can do, though, I'll tell you who's got a really good FODMAP list is Stanford. If you type in a search engine, Stanford FODMAP list, they break FODMAPs down into different categories. Most people that have an issue with FODMAPs don't have an issue with all of the FODMAPs. It's usually they have an issue with a handful of different kinds. Sometimes they're in that same category. And so I would start with that categorical elimination with FODMAPs as opposed to just trying to guess your way through it. Can oregano oil help with gut flora and pooping? It can if you have a yeast overgrowth and the yeast overgrowth that you have is sensitive to oregano, and that would be an effective way to help restore gut flora. But that not as a general rule. Oregano in and of itself, where its impact is mostly in people that have yeast overgrowth. Can steroids cause constipation? More than anything, steroids cause gut damage. They actually cause mucosal damage to the GI tract, especially if you're combining them with non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. When you combine them together, there's like a 7 to 10-fold synergism that damages the gut even more effectively. Could too many vegetables or nuts make H. pylori harder to deal with in the sense of having a bowel movement? What do you recommend? No antibiotics, treating it naturally with a dietitian. I mean, if you've got H. pylori, too many veggies or nuts shouldn't make H. pylori any more challenging for you. But if you're dealing with that naturally, you really want to make sure you have a really solidly, a really smart person backing you up and helping you understand what you need to do. I've seen a lot of people go at that naturally and fail miserably because they were just using either one, things that didn't really have tried and true mechanism of action to work, or two, they were just not using enough of what they needed. So Jean says, does that mean if you have epilepsy and use benzodiazepines that could cause you to have constipation? Yes, that's exactly what that means. Could constipation cause a hernia? My husband has an inguinal hernia. It can, Brigitte. If you're constipated and you're really having to push, right, and you're really having to push just to have a bowel movement, if you have, especially if you're sedentary and you have a weak abdominal wall or weak inguinal muscles around the inguinal region, then you can actually push so hard that you create an evisceration and cause a hernia to occur. So it is possible that constipation can cause or contribute to hernia, which is why it's so important to stay physically fit and in shape, especially within the core and down lower around the inguinal area as well. Will hemorrhoids reverse with a healthy diet change to plant-based, and how long would it typically take? So Melanie, I think you're assuming that plant-based diet is going to heal hemorrhoids, and that's not 100% true at all. There's some people that it's the opposite, that it's a more of a meat-based diet to help them heal a hemorrhoid. I think the first one is find out what's contributing to the hemorrhoid in and of itself. There are a lot of reasons why people develop hemorrhoids, not just one reason. As far as how long does it take for those to recover, it's also different with different people. One of the contributing factors to poor healing or slow healing of hemorrhoids is a deficiency of bioflavonoids and things like vitamin C, which are necessary to form strong collagen to allow those hemorrhoids to heal. How do you address the constipation if you have to take the medication for a seizure and also have been diagnosed with celiac disease? So understand this, Gene, you probably were never told this. If you have celiac disease and you have epilepsy most likely because you are celiac and you haven't changed your diet. You haven't gone gluten-free in the proper way. We are very, very certain that epilepsy is a manifestation. It's one of the many manifestations of gluten sensitivity. And so most people that have a celiac diagnosis that also have an epileptic diagnosis continue to struggle with epileptic symptoms as a result of continuing to get exposure to other forms of gluten, not traditional glutens like wheat, barley, and rye, but some of the other forms of gluten. So you really got to get your diet dialed in first. I've seen a number of epileptic folks be able to get off their medications permanently as a result of changing their diet. So you have to understand that you just were probably never told of the connection. Leela wants to know, or is it Lila, what supplements should you take if you don't have a gallbladder? We have something called Lipogest that I've formulated for those of you, especially if you're trying to follow a true gluten-free diet. And it's got ox bile in it, among other things, that you basically support your body's ability to digest fat in the absence of a gallbladder. What's the difference between ultra nutrients and multi-nutrients? Since following all your recommendations, no more constipation, problems after decades. Thank you. That's awesome, Ricky. Thanks for sharing that. So that's just a testimonial to the no grain, no pain lifestyle, right? So the difference between ultra and multi-nutrients is that ultra nutrients has a lower B vitamin base in it. Some people are more sensitive to B vitamins, and so we use a lower quantity of B vitamin base in ultra nutrients, whereas multi-nutrients has a much stronger quantity of B vitamins. Daily use of prunes, would that be okay for chronic constipation? Well, prunes are a great source of soluble fiber. So where you got to be careful with prunes is they're also high in sugar. So if you're eating prunes daily to incorporate or to have a healthy bowel movement, you might look at your other carbohydrates in your diet and just make sure you're not overdoing those. Are float tanks okay right now with all that's going on? Yeah, I would use one. The COVID, this is going to sound, many of you are probably going to call me a heretic and threaten to burn my house down. But look, COVID's the least of your worries. It's even the Delta variant. The Delta variant is less aggressive and less dangerous than the prior COVID. And so as a virus mutates, it gets weaker, not stronger. Now, it may become more contagious, and that's okay, but COVID as itself, I wouldn't be having fear of COVID over getting in a float tank. Vice, if diarrhea was caused by food poisoning. So a couple of things, Kevin. Number one, strong probiotic. Use something like Ultrabiotic Defense and use it for 2 weeks. And then number two is vitamin C. And vitamin C, you want to get anywhere between, again, guesstimation 3 to 5 grams, and that's what I would recommend if you've had food poisoning and you've got diarrhea, and again, you're just trying to get through that. Is it possible to have diarrhea and constipation at the exact same time? I don't know about exact. I mean, if you're having diarrhea, you're having diarrhea. If you're not going, or if you're struggling to get a bowel movement out. Now, some people struggle, and then when it comes out, there's diarrhea that comes out after a bolus, after a plug. And so if that's what you're referring to, yes, it's possible to have them both at the same time, but not in any other fashion. Is it a bad idea to go to bed with a full stomach? Not really. If you struggle when you lie down at night, if you struggle with reflux or heartburn or bad valve problems, then it's not a great idea. But if you don't, then you can go to bed after having eaten. That's perfectly fine. And some people use like a wedge pillow to prop themselves up so that they're not getting that regurgitation. Let's see. What is a dark tongue? Go down on the left for me. What does a dark tongue mean after a 48-hour bone broth fast? It cleared up after a couple of days. Oftentimes when you fast like that, your microbiome is going through some changes. And so dark tongues typically, just depending, without seeing a picture, it's really hard to judge, but a dark, black, kind of discolored tongue is oftentimes representative of dysbiosis in the gut. And when you fast, the great thing about a 48-hour fast is it's like a reset. You're getting a microbiome alteration. That's one of the benefits, of fasting. So, okay, yeah, Brenda says there are people who are fine with their energy, but then have a bowel movement, and immediately after having that movement, have an energy drain so significant they have to lie down to extreme fatigue or exhaustion. To rest, and any ideas about what causes that? Yes, generally people that have that type of problem where when they have a bowel movement they feel completely drained or wiped out, or in some cases they have pain it's because there's something in their bowels that is very irritating, meaning and what's in your bowel that can be irritated is usually, or irritating rather, is usually something that you ate, something like a food. And so you're purging toxin when you're having that movement, and so your body needs to recover from that toxin purge. And again, oftentimes it's as a result of foods that you're eating that you're not highly allergic to, where you feel terrible when you eat those foods, but that's the consequence. That's kind of why you want to get food sensitivity testing done versus just food allergy. Food allergy is where you have an allergic response to food immediately, very quickly, whereas food sensitivity is where it can have more of a prolonged effect. Kristen, what about IC, pelvic floor, and bladder issues on top of candida? I live in the bathroom because my bladder doesn't hold much. So you've got to really look, Kristen, at two things. Number one, oxalate. Oxalate are a very common cause of interstitial cystitis. I assume that's what you mean by IC. So oxalate, a very common irritant in that regard. And so you might have a really clean diet, like a really gluten-free, grain-free type diet, but you're getting a lot of oxalate in your diet, and that, IC is commonly caused or aggravated or irritated by oxalate. And so we have a really lengthy show that we did not too long ago on oxalate. You might go check that out. So legumes contain lectins. Lectins are not good for gut health. That's a question mark. It's not that lectins aren't good for gut health. It's that some people with damaged guts don't do very well with lectins. So lectins are not an all or none proposition, although they can be for people who are very sick. For many people, lectins are just fine. Depends on the status of your gut. Like some of the jokes. A little boy asked his dad, do trees poop? His dad said, of course. Where do you think number 2 pencils come from? Thanks for the giggle. Let's see here. Why is IBS the worst in the early morning? It's not for everyone. It may just be that that's your manifestation of it. For many people, IBS is actually absolutely the best in the early morning because they're in a fasted state and they haven't eaten. So it depends on you. I would say if you're still struggling, you got to get that checked out. So what if you have a really long poop and you got to flush 3 to 4 times to get it down the toilet? There's nothing wrong with that. If you have a really good bowel movement, you just flush 3 to 4 times and get it down. With these low flow toilets nowadays, thanks to the water conservation movement, toilets don't work as well as they used to. What do you think of a colon cleanse? A colon cleanse is all right if there's a need to do one, but as a general rule of thumb, most people do way too many colon cleanses and never figure out what's actually bothering them, and so they use the colon cleanse as a method of treatment to relieve their constipation or gut problems. But again, it depends. I have SIBO from undiagnosed celiac gene. I don't know how you make those two correlations, but I don't absorb nutrients and do no grain as I can't tolerate it. Have hypothyroidism also. I don't see the question in that. Sorry. I've been having diarrhea since I was taking a 14-day antibiotic for ulcers and H. pylori. So with that, if you're coming off of an antibiotic and you're trying to figure out why you still have diarrhea, the best thing you can do, the safest thing you can do is take a really good, strong probiotic like Ultrabiotic Defense. And if it persists beyond that, you really should follow up with a doctor and get checked out. Let's see here. What do I think of fake meat and digestion? Come on, is that a loaded question? You should know me better than that by now. Fake meat, don't recommend fake meat, don't recommend fake food of any type, of any kind. How can someone who's been taking a daily dose of laxative medication wean it off? What kind of problems can that cause? Well, what kind of problems can weaning off the medicine cause, or what kind of problems can staying on the medication cause at long term? I'm not sure I understand your question, but there's really not a lot of problems with making the attempt to wean. I would just say if you're taking any kind of prescription medicines, you get with your doctor to strategically create a plan for weaning. You don't, with some medications, you just don't want to quit them cold turkey, and because then there could be some possible consequences. So you should have a strategy in place, especially if it's to help you have a bowel movement. You want to make sure you're doing all the right things in your diet and lifestyle to ensure that you're successful with the weaning of the medicine. Otherwise, you could fail and then develop a psychosomatic fear of ever trying to get off the medicine in the future. How do I feel about drinking kombucha? I think it's an overrated, sugary, alcoholic beverage with very little health properties. So hopefully that helps you. Amanda says, I have RA, and after going gluten-free, my RA symptoms are worse, and the flare it's caused is bad. I would have thought it should be the opposite. Any thoughts? How long have you been gluten-free? Because one of the side effects of going gluten-free for some people is that gluten contains proteins that mimic morphine. They're called gluteomorphins, and these proteins act as pain relievers. And so some people initially with autoimmune arthritis, if they go off of gluten, they will have initial flare, but then it will come back under control. So a lot of that just depends on where you're at within the process. Some people quit the diet too quickly because they get scared about a flare. And there could be other factors involved in your flare, and it may not have anything to do with diet, and it may have to do with something else in your diet. So it's a pretty complex question, but I hope that leads you in the right direction. Okay, keep going down on the left. Is having just one bowel movement per day okay for people that do intermittent fasting? Of course, yeah. One to two and even up to 3 bowel movements a day, as long as they're well formed, it's pretty normal. Some people will tell you if you're not having 2 or more, then you're constipated. I don't agree with that. I mean, different people are different. What we want is regular bowel movement. We want a transit time that every day you're having a consistent, predictable bowel movement. Because if you're not, what happens is that poop sits inside your GI tract and it putrefies and it alters your microbiome, and then the byproducts of that leak into your bloodstream and head straight to your liver. So ADHD meds upset my stomach, methylphenidate. Yeah, I mean, it drives up your sympathetic nervous system, so it shuts down digestion. That's why those medicines suppress growth in kids, right? It's one of the side effects. If your kid in school and they want to put you on ADD, ADHD medicines, they tell you don't take it in the summer because you need to do catch-up growth, because it suppresses the appetite. It suppresses gastrointestinal function. Does fasting cause constipation or harder stools? After I fast, I get really cleaned out, then don't go for a while. Depends on how long the fast is. If you're talking about intermittent fasting, like a 16-8, no, not really. It shouldn't cause increases in constipation. But if you're talking about 24, 48-hour fast consistently on a weekly basis, if you don't eat anything for 24 hours, you might not be constipated. You might just not have anything to poop out. So a big part of that answer to that question depends on how long you're doing the fast for. So loud gurgling sound that occurs with or without eating, it's probably your digestive fluids gearing up. I mean, there are a number of things that can stimulate or trigger gastrointestinal fluids to start being produced. Somebody says, thought you were going to be on the toilet showing us how to go. Disappointed. Sorry to disappoint you. That's just a little, what do they say, TMI, too much information? No, we don't need that kind of training here. Sorry to disappoint you. Do any of your, we'll finish up with this last question. Do any of your patients have long COVID? If so, what patterns of possible deficiencies are you seeing? I think more than anything with long COVID, the biggest issue that we're seeing is just they're deficient across the board because they've been so wiped out, and they're tired, and their appetites were maybe poor, and so they're just generally overall malnourished. One of the best things that you can do if you're struggling to kind of get your energy back after you've gotten down with COVID to really support your nutrition is make sure you're on a really strong multivitamin. I would recommend like multi-nutrients. It's stronger. It's got a lot more B vitamins in it. for that type of individual. But also, it's very, very important, after the fact, to make sure that you don't try to push yourself too fast, too hard as you're trying to recover. Look, in America today, everybody is go, 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 go all the time. Everybody thinks that if you're going to get sick, you should only be down for so long and that you should rebound right back up. Look, your body's tired. If it's overcoming an infection, let it rest. And that's what's critical. Remember, there's 7 key fundamentals to recovering, whether you got long COVID or any other type of problem, and that's the right diet, so eating the right quality of food, right? It's adequate sleep, adequate sunshine, it's exercise to tolerance, so that includes if you're trying to overcome long COVID, it's not time to go join the CrossFit box and do heavy aggressive workout. It's time to just do really, really light stuff, range of motion, movement stuff, allow your body time to heal, repair, and recover. Drink clean water, breathe clean air, and reduce any major stress elements in your life. Those 7 things are non-negotiable in terms of your healing. So if you're trying to overcome a long COVID scenario, make sure you're applying those very basic fundamental rules. And if you're still struggling, that's when you probably need to work with somebody for your recovery. All right. Thanks for spending Monday night with me. I hope you learned how to poop better. We'll see you next Monday for another episode of Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. Hey, look, if you're new to the show and you'd like to get more great information without being censored, come visit me at glutenfreesociety.org and sign up there for free. Just sign up for our newsletter. We'll send you tons of free information, but we'll also give you reminders of when we go live on Monday nights and give you the right links to access the show. Hope you have a fantastic week. We'll see you next Monday night for another episode. Take care. Hey, if you've got a functional medicine or health question that you'd like me to answer for you, make sure you send me an email, glutenology@gmail.com, and we'll do our best to create a video answer just for you. Have a great day.